Welcome to Study Smart, the weekly show for wine students who want to take their wine education to the next level. I'm your host, Gill Gordon Smith, and in this episode we're breaking down another important wine region. With exam strategies and techniques to help you reach the next level in your wine education, this is Study Smart. Welcome to the Study Smart series. I'm Gill Gordon Smith, your host and study buddy for this series of summaries on the wines and wine styles of the world. Today we're starting with France as a whole. And this episode is incredibly important because France forms the foundation for a lot of what you may need to know about the wines of the world. Before you can understand Bordeaux, Burgundy, the Rhone or the Loire, you need to understand the bigger picture. We need to look at important factors such as climate, grape suitability, soils and classification systems. And most importantly, you need to understand and apply cause and effect. Why certain grapes grow successfully in certain climates. Why some wines are high in acidity. Why others are full-bodied and high in alcohol. Why some regions blend and others focus on single varieties. If you're sitting, for example, the WSET Level 3, examiners are always looking for this connection between natural factors, human decisions, and wine style. So let's look at how wines are classified. In Europe, you may need to recognise the traditional terms. France follows the European Union Geographical Indication System. So at the broader level, we have PGI wines, and in France, these are labelled IGP or sometimes Vin de Pays. These wines allow for more flexibility, for example, wider grape variety choices, higher yields, and more freedom in winemaking. As a result, these wines may be different varieties from the allowed, more fruit-driven, or intended for earlier drinking. Above this level, we move into PDO wines, and in France, these are labelled AOC, or simply AC, Appellation d'origine contrôlée. These wines have much stricter production laws controlling the grape varieties they can use, the vineyard boundaries, the yields, the alcohol levels, and the winemaking methods. And this is important because the French system is heavily focused on origin and typicity, the idea that wines should reflect the place that they're grown and made. This system tells you where the grapes were grown and sometimes the style and the quality levels expected. As you move into more prestigious regions, labels become more specific. You may see village names, cru names, words such as Premier Cru or Grand Cru. But these terms mean slightly different things depending on the region. For example, Burgundy focuses heavily on vineyard site. Bordeaux focuses more on chateau classification, while the Alsace labels by grape variety. So part of studying France is understanding that each region has its own logic and structure. France contains several major climate types, and climate is one of the most important drivers of wine style. The three key climate categories are maritime, continental, and Mediterranean. Let's look at a maritime climate. This type of climate is found in Bordeaux, in Nantes, home of Muscadet, situated in the Western Loire Valley. And in France, maritime climates are influenced by the Atlantic Ocean. This creates milder temperatures, relatively long growing seasons, and results in lower annual temperature variation. But rainfall is spread throughout the growing season, and this creates several major problems, such as fungal disease, rot, dilution, and vintage variation. And this is one reason that blending is such an important strategy in Bordeaux. Different grape varieties respond differently to difficult conditions. For example, Merlot ripens earlier than Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet ripens later and provides structure. So blending reduces risk and helps to create balance. And this is exactly the kind of climate and human factor connection that can gain good marks in an examination situation, as well as help us to understand why wines taste a certain way. A continental climate is different. So let's move inland into Burgundy, Alsace and Champagne. Here the climate becomes continental. Continental climates have colder winters, warmer summers, and much larger temperature differences between seasons. So one of the biggest risks here is spring frost. If temperatures rise early in spring, vines begin budburst. But if temperatures suddenly drop again, young buds can be destroyed, and this can dramatically reduce yields. And this is particularly dangerous for early budding grapes like Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Spring frost is a major risk in continental France, especially where early budding varieties like Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are grown, which is why site selection and frost protection matter. Because of frost risk, growers use several vineyard strategies, and one of the most important is slope position, because cold air drains downhill, so mid-slope vineyards are generally warmer and safer than valley floors. And this is one reason why the best vineyards in Burgundy are often on mid-slopes. Many of Burgundy's most prized vineyards are located on the mid-slope. To assist in moderating this risk, growers may also use heaters, wind machines, or sprinklers, but these methods are expensive. As we move south towards the Mediterranean coast, the climate changes again. It becomes Mediterranean, and Mediterranean climates have hot, dry summers, mild winters, and abundant sunshine. This means disease pressure is lower because rainfall during the growing season is limited. But now we've got some different problems that appear: drought, water stress, and maybe very high sugar levels because of the extra sunshine. This leads often to riper fruit, higher alcohol, and softer acidity in the wines. This climate suits heat-loving varieties such as Grenache, Mourvèdre, and Syrah. These grapes can tolerate strong sunlight, drought, and heat accumulation. France is famous for many of the world's international grape varieties, including Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir, and Sauvignon Blanc. But we also need to remember regional grapes if we're studying, especially for WSET. For example, in the Loire Valley, Chenin Blanc and Cabernet Franc are the main grape varieties. In the Rhône, we're looking at Syrah, Grenache, and Viognier. In the southwest, Malbec, which is known locally as Cotte, and Tannat, and along the Mediterranean coast, Mourvèdre and Picpoul. We need to recognise and understand why these grapes work and succeed where they do. And many of these grapes became international because successful French styles were widely copied. Soils are also critical in France because different soils affect drainage, water retention, vine vigour, and heat retention. For example, gravel soils in Bordeaux drain quickly and warm up rapidly, so this helps Cabernet Sauvignon ripen. Limestone soils in Burgundy, for example, are associated with wines that show freshness and precision. Granite soils in Beaujolais reduce fertility and produce more concentrated gamay. Again, good answers always connect soil, the grape, and the wine style. For WSET Level 3, France is not about memorising endless village names. It's about understanding climate, soils, grape suitability, and human decisions. If you can explain why Cabernet Sauvignon grows on gravel, why Pinot Noir struggles in heat, why Mediterranean wines are fuller-bodied, or why maritime climates encourage blending, applying these factors really helps with understanding and will gain you really good marks. So what are the most important final takeaways we can identify? France is shaped by diverse climates, complex appellation systems, and strong regional identity. Maritime climates create rainfall, disease pressure, and make blending a necessity. Continental climates create frost risk, slower ripening, and higher acidity, and Mediterranean climates create riper fruit, higher alcohol, and drought pressure. And throughout France, the key to understanding wine style is always the same. Natural factors influence human decisions, which then shape the final style and quality of the wine. At the end of each episode, we're going to take 3 minutes to explore what neuroscience tells us about learning, because studying harder doesn't always mean studying better, and sometimes the techniques we trust the most are the least effective. So here's today's idea. Recognition is not memory. If you've ever read a page 3 times, highlighted half of it, nodded along and thought, yes, I know this, only to close the book and realise you can't actually explain any of it, you're absolutely not alone. And here's what the science says. Your brain is very good at recognising information it's just seen. That feeling of familiarity. It feels like learning, but often it's just recognition. and recognition is much easier than recall. The real learning happens when you have to pull information out of your brain, and that process is called retrieval practice. And it's one of the strongest evidence-based study techniques we have. So researchers have compared students who reread material with students who tested themselves instead. And the result was the retrieval group remembered significantly more later on. And that's because every time you retrieve information, you strengthen the pathway to that memory. It's a bit like walking a trail through long grass. The more often you walk it, the clearer the path becomes. So let's bust a myth. The myth is, if I've read it enough times, I know it. Not necessarily. Your textbook can be very convincing because it gives you the illusion of knowing because the material looks familiar. But familiarity is not mastery. So here's your experiment for this week. Pick one topic, anything. It could be wine law, Bordeaux classifications, photosynthesis, Italian grammar, whatever you're learning. Study it for 10 minutes and then close everything. No notes, no book, no phone. Take a blank page and write down everything you can remember. Now, don't worry if it feels difficult. That struggle is actually the learning happening. Then compare your brain dump with the original material. See what you missed, fill the gaps, and repeat. And here's your reflection challenge. When I study, am I actually recognizing information, or can I actually retrieve it? Try replacing just one rereading session this week with retrieval practice and see what happens. Because the goal is not to spend more time studying, it's to make the time count. So see you next week for another Study Smarter session where we'll be covering and going in depth into Bordeaux. Thank you for listening to Study Smart. If you're ready to take your wine education to the next level, why not visit the Italian Wine Academy at italianwineacademy.org. Don't forget to tune in next week when we'll be exploring another important wine region. Until then, chin chin with the Italian wine people.